Good. All right. Well, I'm so happy that you're all here today. We are going to be talking about Fred Rogers. And I say talking about because I really hope we have some good discussion. I'm going to share some of my favorite stories about Fred Rogers, sort of go over some of his accomplishments. Only a couple, because if I remember right, I think Fred won about 40 awards and had, I think, at least 8 to 10 honorary degrees. So he was an incredibly accomplished individual. But as he was sort of an incredibly influential individual for public broadcasting, I thought it would be good to start off with this theme song.
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? It's a neighborly day in this neighborhood, a neighborly day for beauty. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? I have always wanted to have a neighbor just like you. I've always wanted to live in.
So Mr. Rogers, I like to call him the most famous Presbyterian. So this is because he was first.
That's such an exciting,
I know, like the most famous Presbyterian. So what was really interesting about him is that he was first and foremost a Presbyterian minister. And all of his television work, all of his broadcasting work, all of his music work was all done as a ministry. See, he saw broadcasting and he saw doing his television work as sort of an untapped resource, as a way to reach children. So he went to Pittsburgh Seminary, and what was really interesting is, so most people who go to seminary now get a master's in divinity. They did not have a master's of divinity back when he went to seminary, so he got a bachelor's of divinity. Then he was the minister of United Presbyterian Church, and that was just for about a year, until he realized that he really wanted to pursue children's programming. So during his time, it was said that he would often have to meet with the presbytery in Pittsburgh to keep up with the fact that this was in fact a ministry. Now what was really interesting is he never overtly prayed or did any Bible studies in his programming, but what his focus was to teach and to learn and to empower kids to be who they are, to really give them to empower them to feel valued and to give them the needs that maybe they weren't getting. So before in this class, you've had Kevin Long teach you all, I think, a couple classes. Mm-hmm. If you could think of his role, that's who Mr. Rogers was. So it's called an organizing pastor or evangelist. So that is who Mr. Rogers was for the Presbyterian Church. So all of his work was a ministry. Any questions? And please feel free to jump in wherever you'd like. So he originally, first and foremost, got a degree in music from Roland College in 1951. So all of the music on Fred Rogers' program was written by him. It snuck in there. Master's of Divinity from Pittsburgh Theological Seminary in 1962. If you go on all the sources, many will correct the Bachelor's of Divinity to Master's of Divinity, so I should do that in my presentation. He became a minister in 1963, And then he attended the University of Pittsburgh Graduate School for Child Development, which started a 33-year collaboration with that school. And over that time, he achieved 40 honorary degrees. And this was all through, well, what would eventually be public broadcasting, which was Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He was born in Latrobe, which is a suburb outside of Pittsburgh. And this might be one of the reasons why I really appreciate Fred Rogers. So as a child, he was very, very shy. He really had a lot of anxiety being in front of people, and it was actually said that he didn't have too many friends before high school. So one of the nicknames that he was given was Fat Freddy. So if you can imagine what it would be like for a middle schooler to have all these anxieties, to be very introverted, to eventually become Mr. Rogers, the man who was in television for 30 or 40 years, and to have such a significant impact in the world of child development, and well, just being the person that we know today. I mean, it has been since the 60s, and in the past 5 years, there's already been a documentary made about Fred Rogers, and there was a movie with Tom Hanks made about him. The legacy carries on. And even in the world of Mr. Rogers, we'll learn a little bit about this later, there was Daniel the Tiger. That is a new show that is based off of Fred Rogers, so that legacy still continues today. So all of the awards, I do not believe that this is a complete list because he was incredibly accomplished. He was a four daytime Emmy Award winner. He had a Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Academy of Television and Arts and Sciences. He received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And in the Smithsonian, you can actually go in there and still see one of his red cardigans. He is inducted into the Television Hall of Fame, and he received a Peabody Award. And once again, this is not an exhaustive list. As I continued to do more and more research, I found more and more awards and threw them up on here as I found them, but he was incredibly accomplished over his lifetime. So Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood did not begin as Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. The title of the show was The Children's Corner, and it was based out of Canada. And it was really interesting. It was Fred Rogers, and there was just sort of a canvas on the back. And there was a clock tower in which the door would open, and then he would have the one puppet, which was Daniel Tiger. And that was the beginning of the Children's Corner. And as time gone on, and as he invested into that show, it developed into what we saw in that introduction. So Mr. Rogers wrote all of the music, and he also acted as all of the puppets. So as a child, I used to watch this show, and I used to wonder where Mr. Rogers went, and then all of a sudden a puppet would pop onto the screen. So all of the puppet acting, all of those actors, all of the voices was Mr. Rogers himself. So he really helped public broadcasting become what it is today. I thought that this was a really important clip to show you all because this is when Fred Rogers in 1969 was able to gain a tremendous amount of funding, which led to much of his program and which led to much of the content that we see today. So we'll take a look at this. This was a Senate subcommittee that was deciding if Fred Rogers should be able to receive funding to continue his programming.
Rogers is certainly one of the best things that's ever happened to public television, and his Peabody Award is testament to that fact. We in public television are proud of Fred Rogers. I'm proud of everything.
philosophical statement and would take about 10 minutes to read, so I'll not do that. One of the first things that a child learns in a healthy family is trust. And I trust what you have said that you will read this. It's very important to me. I care deeply about children. My first
Will
children...
it make you happy if you read it?
I'd just like to talk about it if it's all right. My first children's program was on WQED 15 years ago, and its budget was $30. Now, with the help of the Sears Roebuck Foundation and National Educational Television, as well as all of the affiliated stations, each station pays to show our program. It's a unique kind of funding in educational television. With this help, now our program has a budget of $6,000. It may sound like quite a difference, but $6,000 pays for less than 2 minutes of cartoons, 2 minutes of animated, what I sometimes say, bombardment. I'm very much concerned, as I know you are, about what's being delivered to our children in this country. And I've worked in the field of child development for 6 years now, trying to understand the inner needs of children. We deal with such things as the inner drama of childhood. We don't have to bop somebody over the head to make him to make drama on the screen. We deal with such things as getting a haircut, or the feelings about brothers and sisters, and the kind of anger that arises in simple family situations. And we speak to it constructively.
How long the program is?
It's a half hour every day. Most channels schedule it in the noontime as well as in the evening. WETA here has scheduled it in the late afternoon.
Could we get a copy of this? Maybe not today, but I'd like to see it.
So, I don't know if, how many of you are able to hear that. I apologize for how quiet that is. But during the Senate subcommittee hearing, Fred Rogers is making the case that he needs more funding. I think he said something like it was $1,000 or so that or $6,000 was his budget. And he was advocating to receive $20 million. And I think a really important moment during this was when the chairperson who was talking to Mr. Rogers said, "I am normally a pretty intense individual, or pretty grumpy, I guess." And then he says, "And you are the first person ever to give me goosebumps." And then afterwards, he told Mr. Rogers that he's pretty certain that he's going to get the $20 million, which was where a lot of public broadcasting television came from. So Francois Clemens was on Fred Rogers from 1968 to 1993. He was Officer Clemens, if you've watched the television show. Now, he received a Bachelor's of Music from Oberlin College and a Master of Fine Arts from Carnegie Mellon. What was really interesting, and you'll see this, is that he was a musician. He was very interested in continuing his work as a musician, and was hesitant at first to join Mr. Rogers. But Mr. Rogers sort of had a way of convincing people, of walking alongside people and partnering with them, and saw their worth. So Clemens was also a part of the queer community. And this was in the 60s, and he was black. So the fact that Fred Rogers decided to cast Francois Clemens made a statement. And it showed that Mr. Rogers did indeed see value in everyone. And he wanted people to be just as they were. So Fred Rogers asked Francois Clemens to keep his lifestyle to himself, as he worried that it would he worried that it could take away from the television show if the optics came out. And this is one of the moments where I liked Mr. Rogers' progression, how he sort of learned and changed his mind. Because as Mr. Rogers experienced or observed the Stonewall riots, he later encouraged Francois Clemens to be all of who he was, to live the lifestyle that he felt was best for him. Hopefully we will have better audio. So this right here is Francois Clemens on Mr. Rogers' show. And then afterwards he'll give a brief interview as to what it was like to work with Mr. Rogers.
Handyman Negri and Officer Clemens, I presume?
Correct as always, Your Highness.
Could we take a close look at your badge here, Officer Clemens? My friends, I think, can read it. P-O-L-I-C-E.
I have always felt policemen to be the most dangerous person in the neighborhood. So to have me playing a police officer, I was tremendously hesitant. But there was something reluctant about Fred to let go. And I said, Mr. Rogers, I would be very happy to be on your program, as long as it doesn't interfere with my singing. We've had it and now we can go. We don't want the snow anymore. And he teased me about that for 20 years. He'd say, oh, Mr. Clemens, are we interfering with your career? Are we interfering? He was relentless, but he also told me, he said, that was the moment I loved you. He said, because you were not going to kiss my ass. Those are Mr. Rogers' words.
That feels good. Oh, there's Officer Clemens. Hi, Officer Clemens. Come in.
Rogers, how are you?
Fine, why don't you sit down?
Oh, sure, just for a moment.
It's so warm, I was just putting some water on my feet.
Oh, it sure is.
Would you like to join me?
It looks awfully enjoyable, but I don't have a towel or anything.
Oh, you share mine.
Okay.
Sure.
Around the country, they didn't want black people to come and swim in their swimming pools. And Fred said, that is absolutely ridiculous.
Today, troubled under a noon sun, Negroes and white rabbis marched to a segregated hotel with these results. Manager James Brock told them to get off his private property, tossed cleaning chemicals inside the pool in an effort to get the Negroes to leave.
My being on the program was a statement for Fred.
Cool water on a hot day.
So, I will not do a good enough job expressing just how much I admire this action and how Fred Rogers' ministry was incarnational. At first glance, it seems like Fred Rogers is just making children's programming. But in all of the decisions that he made, in all of the music he wrote, the people who he casted, it was always this central theme that you are special just the way you are, that you are loved, and he really wanted to convey that to people. He really wanted people to know that. He felt like that was a need for all people, especially children. So another really interesting story which illustrated the fact that Fred Rogers cared about each and every person was feeding his fish on the show. So there was a time during Fred Rogers' show where he would go and he'd feed the fish, and he wouldn't say that he was feeding the fish. But there was this little girl who wrote a letter to Mr. Rogers, and she said, "Dear Mr. Rogers, please say when you are feeding the fish, because I worry about them. I can't see if you are feeding them, so please say if you are feeding the fish out loud. Now, the father's note to this fan letter was that Kate was blind, and she does cry if you do not say that you have fed the fish, because this 5-year-old girl who was blind was just so worried about that. So from that moment forward, Fred Rogers would narrate whenever he would take some fish food and put it in the tank. And this later led into the realization that Fred Rogers actually read every single piece of fan mail that came in. Now, people tried to verify this because as Fred Rogers grew in popularity, it seemed like that was an impossible task. But time and time again, when they tried to verify if there was actually fan mail that Fred Rogers didn't respond to, whenever they would follow up on that, they found that Fred Rogers did indeed respond to each and every piece of fan mail and read them. So, this is Fred Rogers.
Of course, things don't always turn out to be just the way we plan. But we'll make believe about that another day. Here you are, fish.
So something just as simple as that showed how important it was that Fred Rogers cared about his fan base, cared about kids, and did everything he could to give them what they need. Now this was a really interesting story that I found. So Fred Rogers, for 19 years, weighed 143 pounds exactly whenever he went to get a physical. So why he did this is there was a time when he got his first physical, and he got up on the scale, and he realized that his weight was 143, and for him, that was the number of love. And if you look at I love you, the first word of I is 1, love is 4, and you is 3. So he just thought that this was so wonderful and so great that he decided that he was going to do everything he could to continue to stay 143 pounds, sort of as a spiritual discipline to stay healthy, but also as a daily reminder that he loved people. He was also a vegetarian, and to accomplish this number, he went on a strict exercise regimen every morning. I believe I read he would wake up at 6 a.m. just to go and exercise for 2 hours before his day. But can you imagine what it would be like to stay the weight of 143 pounds for 19 years straight? I mean, that task seems impossible, at least to me. Now, I've done a lot of information dumping here. Are there any questions about Fred Rogers so far? I mean, we've went over his lifestyle, his public broadcasting, some of his social activism. Do you all have any questions about Fred Rogers?
Do you know how far down in weight he came to get to 143?
I know that he was overweight in middle school, and then as of that, oh, actually you'll see at the end, that's early on in his career. So I don't know how far down he came. I think it was just a realization that 143 was the same number of letters as I love you. It was more the keeping that weight. That was the, I guess, the real challenge. Any other questions? Or anything you all have been wondering so far? No? Okay. So as we talked a little bit before, Daniel Tiger was a puppet on his show. And it was the first puppet that Fred Rogers actually received. And Daniel Tiger has since become a cartoon that's a part of the Fred Rogers universe. It can be found on public broadcasting. It's a cartoon that I showed my children, and I'm not gonna lie, I was a little sad because I showed them Fred Rogers, his program at first, and I showed it to Gideon, and I was like, "See, this is Mr. Rogers, isn't that great?" And he watched a little bit. But I showed him Daniel Tiger, and he would watch that pretty religiously for his toddler years. Now, Daniel Tiger, the cartoon, takes all of those puppets and then has them grow up into adults, and then the narratives take place from that world. So this show was made to be a legacy show for Fred Rogers. And many believe that the character Daniel, throughout all of the puppetry that Mr. Rogers did, was a representation of who Fred Rogers was as a child. So he even goes on to say that when he's talking about feelings with Daniel Tiger, that it's much easier for him to say, I need a hug, or I love you. But as an adult, it was really challenging for him to say those things. So a lot of people on this production team would say that Daniel Tiger was Mr. Rogers as a boy, and struggling with the world, struggling with all of the challenges that he faced, and learning how to overcome them. So this is the Daniel Tiger Show, if you have not seen it.
Today's watch list is a celebration of sorts. Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood is the #1 rated show for preschoolers, and it's reaching a big milestone. So we are looking at some fascinating facts behind its success.
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor.
This is the modern version of Daniel Tiger. He's celebrating his 10th anniversary on air, but you may remember him as the lovable but nervous puppet from an iconic children's show.
Because of the great work that Mr. Rogers did, and there's a lot of hope to build upon his legacy.
But I just can't go to school tomorrow.
Executive producer Angela C. Santamero and supervising producer Chris Loggins share some fascinating facts about this sweet little tiger, beginning with his origin story.
Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood is inspired by Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and so all of the characters from the neighborhood of make-believe have all grown up, and they all have preschoolers of their own.
When Daniel Tiger made his first appearance on the Children's Corner in 1954, he lived in a cuckoo clock.
How do you do? How do you do?
Somebody had given me this little tiger puppet. I pushed it through the clock and said,
Hi, Josie, it's 5:02 and Columbus discovered America in 1492.
After that introduction, Daniel Tiger and his friends made the jump to the now legendary Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor.
And the way he addressed some common fears may have helped kids with their own.
I've never seen a tiger that looks like me.
Next, Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood is all about teaching kid-friendly lessons.
Since Prince Tuesday is away at college, she can't come babysit you. A new babysitter is coming.
Oh, right. But I don't want a new babysitter.
We tackle big feelings and big challenges that preschoolers have every day.
That makes me so mad. Roar!
The cartoon even tackled the anxious feelings kids have when getting dropped off for school.
So you'll come back?
I will come back.
Grr. Okay.
And sometimes there's lessons for grown-ups too.
Our favorite story is when a child will tell their parent, take a deep breath and count to 4.
When you feel so mad that you wanna roar, take a deep breath and count to 4.
At the tail end of our celebration of Daniel Tiger's anniversary are the diverse characters in the show.
Your turn. Meow. Thanks, Miss Elena.
We want to be thoughtful about using the resources that we have available and making the show to make sure that all kids can see themselves positively represented.
Hey there, Daniel. Good to see you.
Hi.
You can watch Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood streaming free.
So that was Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. Any question? Has anybody here seen Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood? No.
Well, so Gideon found he saw an episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
A couple episodes.
Did he find it too slow?
He did. The pacing was, he really liked the puppets, which makes sense. But the slowness of the program, and at the time we were being pretty careful to curate what he was watching and not watching. But I think even still, how slow paced it was compared to that. I mean, if you look at, or if you remember Fred Rogers, and then you look at that is significantly faster paced. So yeah, I mean, he resonated a lot more with that, but as I watched Fred Rogers growing up and saw Daniel Tiger, the spirit of the show is still the same. I mean, they really wanted to make a legacy show to continue all of what Mr. Rogers did. And it comes from Mr. Rogers' production company, so. Yeah.
During the early days, Sesame Street was on at the same time, and that provided a real contrast to Mr. Rogers.
Sure.
I think complicated things a bit by providing a comparison.
Sure. Sure, I could see that. I mean, unfortunately, I don't know how much you heard of the Senate hearing, but he really went into his philosophy on how to make programming for children. And he was so tremendously intentional that he did not want to just do something for entertainment's sake. He wanted to make it so it was good, like in a health way, in a spiritual way, because once again, even though he did not speak about Christianity directly in his programming, this was all a ministry of the Presbyterian Church. And through all of his education, through child development, he wanted to make sure that everything was intentionally there. So even though Gideon might think it's funny to see somebody bop somebody on the head, that doesn't provide a whole lot of learning. It doesn't really, all it does is provide entertainment. So I think that if you watch, everything is done with care, all of his songs, all of his skits.
Yeah, our attention span has gotten so short in today's world, even kids.
Yeah.
And I see it at the museum, and it drives me nuts. Kids that can't even walk have a screen in front of them, and they're watching cartoons or whatever it is that they're watching, and their attention span's about this big.
I mean, for
and
me,
it's just frustrating.
For me doing children's programming, I mean, even just moving spaces helps with that. But I mean, 15 minutes in one space is a super long time for a child. So our attention spans have grown shorter. I can't speak with any kind of huge knowledge base, but I mean, I know a lot of that is attributed to technology, to social media, to instant gratification.
Yeah. I cannot imagine what it'd be like in a classroom in school today.
Sure.
I just cannot see kids sitting. That's why classes are down to about 35 minutes now instead of an hour.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean,
Nobody sits that long.
Our VPS program, every workshop is 15 minutes,
because
that's about how long. So, and I don't think it's just children either. I think it's adults as well.
It starts there and then grows up.
That's right.
Or up here and grows down. I'm not sure which way is most responsible, but
yeah. These are great questions. Any other questions or wanderings?
You may have addressed this before, but what are some of the, how are you taking your appreciation for Fred Rogers, Daniel Tiger, those types of things, and bringing them here in our programs for our
Sure. So for me personally, I mean, the inspiration I take is just his intentionality in everything that he did, not just to do things for entertainment's sake, but to have a reason behind everything that you do. And actually, that leads into the next slide. So I think 5 takeaways that we can get from Mr. Rogers is that we should infuse everything with love. So everything that Mr. Rogers did was dripping with love. It was sort of incarnational in his program. And I mean, even in today's culture, that's not a common thing to say, I love you, to someone outside of your family. But if you watch much of his program, that is something that Mr. Rogers said frequently. So I think loving as much and as incarnationally as we can. I think Fred Rogers was very interested in giving ownness and recognizing a person's identity, and seeing that as, well, these are my words now, seeing that as a beautiful and wonderful creation of God. So how do we encourage kids to live into who God made them? How do we give them the opportunity to be curious about faith? How do we give them the opportunities to experiment with arts, or with activities, with sports, with relationships even? Providing that space, that safe space, while giving them the encouragement that they are loved and that who they are is worth it.
Shawn, what do we know about his parents in his early years of coming up? Because if he has that kind of attitude, I just wondered if he gets it from his parents.
So I didn't read anything bad about his parents. I didn't read much good. There wasn't a whole lot of reporting that I found, which makes me think that it was well, bad news sells, unfortunately. So I think that if there were some skeletons in the closet, that we'd see that. So I assume that he came from a good household, but I didn't read much.
He came from a wealthy household.
Yeah.
And that helped a lot.
Sure.
His way, his education and so forth.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't have a great grasp on the worth of money, but I do know at one point for his program, his first program, Children's Corner, there was $150 that was split between him and another person. So $75 a person, and that's what they had to live off of, and also pour back into the show. So the one picture where you saw Daniel Tiger come out with just that canvas, everything that came from that, at least in their early years, they would take from their own salary to buy more puppets, to make the show better. Until the Senate hearing, when they finally got significantly more funding. I believe later on in that video, once the show became somewhat popular, different networks would pick it up, and then they would receive some funding that way as well. So yeah. So respect your storytelling responsibility. So this goes back to the belief that we all have a story to tell, that we all have our experience, and that it's actually our responsibility to share that experience, to tell others about the hardships and the triumphs that we've had. And this sort of goes into why I've used a fair amount of videos, and why I think Fred Rogers only spent a year as a minister at a church and then the rest of his time in public broadcasting, because he believed that television, that screens actually, was an untapped resource to really engage with the public and engage with children. And he thought that that was a wonderful way to share stories with them. He believed that we were to break down barriers where people felt like they couldn't be who they were. And an example of that was Officer Clemens. And the last one I really, really enjoyed, because it almost goes into what we were just talking about attention spans. I mean, the character McFeely was intentionally created to try to explain how we should take our time, how we shouldn't rush through everything. If you remember on the show, it was always Mr. McFeely that would come in and say speedy delivery, and he was always this anxious presence where he wanted to just deliver the mail and be done. And throughout the show, he realized that it was okay to take a second, to spend time to be present with Mr. Rogers, and Mr. Rogers was able to model that. So, I mean, these are the things that I have gleaned from Fred Rogers. During his time, he was pretty revolutionary in using television, and who he casted, in really integrating child development into his programming. And he did it all because he wanted to help children. It was never to get famous, it was never to become a YouTube star, it was never to, I guess those metrics of success weren't as important to him as spreading the message to children that they are loved and that Mr. Rogers loved them just as they were.
How much did the Muppets follow after Fred Rogers? Muppets, because as I recall in watching the Muppets, they repeated themes, like for weeks on end. They just repeat these little snippets.
Sure.
Every puppet, as soon as you saw them, you knew what was going to come because they were all repetitive. And one way of teaching, I guess, is repetitiveness. Mm-hmm. And particularly if you're down around kindergarten, first graders, or below kindergarten, preschool, the repetition is how you learn to do
Sure.
things.
Sure. I mean, I can speak from my experience that during writing Sunday school curriculum and also for VBS, I try to look for that boiled down one statement that at the very least I want the kids to walk away with. Whether it is God loves you, or I think today they're teaching about how to be a friend, that they should be friends with one another. So for sure, and I'll be honest, I didn't watch the Muppets that much, so I don't know. But
around as long as I am, you see a lot of these different things.
I'm sure. I'm sure. But yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me. Any other questions?
When did Fred Rogers die? I've forgotten.
It was, I should know the exact year, but it was, I believe, the late 2000s, maybe, because Daniel the Tiger started in 2018, and I believe that was 10 years after he had passed. So around 2008, and he died from stomach cancer. Yeah, and he he did his programming as long as he could.
2003.
2003, okay.
Gotta use my resources.
That's right. Google is a wonderful thing, for sure.
Way
Yeah.
to go, Bill. Just blown out.
You didn't even see that, did you?
Any other questions?
I got one.
Go for it.
How long did his programming last? I mean, when did he finally finish up his programming? And did it overlap into the computer age? Did he ever broach that subject on the shows?
So I'll be honest, I haven't watched all of Fred Rogers' episodes. I don't remember him doing much more than low-tech puppets. I don't remember him talking much about computers or anything like that. And I know that his programming lasted at least 33 years, but I want to say it was past 40. And it still is around. So, and this is something that I appreciate about technology. So he got the $20 million grant for public broadcasting. PBS used to just be a channel on the television, but now PBS is an application on iPads or on Kindles. And for me, it was such a tremendous resource for my kids, because for us at least, we let them have tablets, but I could say you have to stay on the PBS Kids app. And there was the Mr. Rogers Show, there was Daniel the Tiger, and there was all sorts of other programming that was educational programming. It was all with intention. And it was nice as a parent to be able to still give my kids the ability to watch programming, to I guess experience technology like many other kids do, but know that it was quality programming. So, and I would be so bold to say that that would not have been possible without Fred Rogers' early on being able to convince that Senate commission to really, I mean, going from $6,000 to $20 million in 1968 was a huge a huge achievement. So.
Yeah, I can remember that Romper Room and the various offsets in the early years, as I recall, they were local TV shows put on by different characters. They followed kind of a script, but they were put on by local people. It was a while before they became syndicated and shown on more than one station at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were very simple shows like he did. Just it was the leader and one or two cast and.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like it was a project that he felt strongly about, but did not have much funding to begin with. All right, well, if there aren't any other questions, I felt like it was appropriate to end with a goodbye song. Now, this is a younger Mr. Rogers. I really struggled because I almost ended with his last goodbye, but that honestly felt just a little too sad to start. So.
And the good thing about the end of a week is that we can look forward to the beginning of the next, when I'll be back, when the week is new, and I'll have more ideas for you, and you'll have things you'll want to do, and I will too. I'll think of you when I'm not here, 'cause thinking of people makes them seem near. The friends who know you, love you cheerfully, I do too.
All right, well, thank you all for coming. Like I said, I'm around if you want to ask any more questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. And I mean, if the one takeaway, the boiled down message that I go through for Sunday school curriculums or like the Muppets used to do is, I think if Mr. Rogers wants you to know one thing, it's that you are loved and that you are special just the way you are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are we all there?